I trust this finds you doing well. As we go through Ephesians, I find myself encouraged again, reading this and seeing things new and afresh. In verse number 7, it says, "But grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. Therefore, it says, when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives, and he gave gifts to men." In saying he ascended, what does it mean but that he also descended into the lower regions of the earth? He who descended is the one who also ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fill all things. Well, Paul is laying out for the people, the believers, the immensity of God's great gift in sending his son Jesus. He tells us that grace was given each one according to the measure of Christ. And we know that God is rich in mercies and grace. He has no lack. I know there are times when we feel like we must have outsinned his grace and his mercy. But the reality is that God does not have a meager portion of grace to pour out on you. He's rich in grace. He has an abundance of grace for you. And that grace is really manifest in the Son. When we were his enemies, he gave his life freely for us. Now, right after he says the measure of Christ's gift, which is the same as God's gift, right? That he gave his own life to be our salvation. This is a gift. He quotes from Psalm 68, verse 18. And if you want to go back and later and read Psalm 68, well, you're going to see that David is writing that psalm as a declaration of triumph in how God had given him great victory. So he talks about, he led a host of captives and he gave gifts to men. And this was very typical of the time as he would return to Jerusalem. The spoils from the enemy, the captives, would be led into the city, and then as a part of this celebration, the king would hand out gifts to the people. But it's also shows us that while this is true of what David did, I think he's showing us that there is a picture of what Jesus did. He came and he led everything that was held captive by sin and Satan, and he delivered. And he gives gifts. We'll see what those gifts were probably in the next devotional. And he says, in saying he ascended, well, what does that mean? But that he also descended into the lower regions, the earth. So we know that Jesus was eternal with the Father. And at the appointed time, he came and he took on human flesh, conceived by the Holy Spirit through Mary. And he gave birth and she gave birth and he grew, and then he began his ministry. So he came from upon high and he descended. But he didn't just descend from heaven into earth, which was quite the change. He actually went to the cross, and to the lower parts, right? I think speaks of the grave. He went to the cross, became what we were. He paid the price that we could not pay. He gave up his life, he was buried, and then he rose again. 40 days later, ascending to be seated at the right hand of the Father. And we saw earlier that he took us with him. He said, he who descended is the one who also ascended far above all the heavens, that it might fill all things. This is how complete this perfect one-time sacrifice of Jesus's was. He conquered the grave. He conquered Satan. He conquered sin and death. And he rose and he ascended above all things. Just like David would make a triumphant entry and coming back up into Jerusalem to declare victory, Jesus is our victory. And he declares to all. Next time, we're going to look at the gifts that he gives to us as a part of his great victory. Gifts for us, his children, and gifts for the world, that they too might hear the good news. Well, you have a great day, and God bless.